From times immemorial, mankind has yearned for something more. Something that makes life make sense. A reason to keep going. An oasis in the desert. Something or someone to hold when the world ends. We spend our lives on this earth looking for it like thieves in the night. Yet some of us had it figured out all along. Mine's Pokemon. My first game ever was Sapphire, and I played it at like 6 years old, so I genuinely mean it when I say I don't remember a single time in my life where Pokemon wasn't in it. However, as I've grown older and peeked outside of my rose-tinted glasses, I've come to realize that some elements in the beginning were a little rough. I'm now a designer, which I think gives me a license to be a raging about designs that I think are subpar, or could be more interesting. But I'll admit though, most of the ones we're gonna go over today aren't necessarily bad, just concepts and ideas that I personally would like to see better explored. So today, we're going to explore. Here's today's roster. I wanted to keep it fairly balanced with one trainer per region up to Sinnoh. To be honest with you, I think something happened around the development of Generation 5 in Unova that made the character designers really lock in. And I personally think character design-wise, Pokemon has only gotten better since. Some of my favorite examples are actually from the last generation. Before we begin though, everything I say and do in this video is purely from the point of view of my style of design. I don't know enough about competitive or the anime and manga to comment on anything but that, but I tried my best to research on what would be important to keep in mind. Having said that, we can start with Erika. I'll be honest, I don't really have any major issues with Erika's design. The reason why I chose her is because out of the Kanto leaders, I thought she was the one who allowed for the most stunts and like shenanigans in her design concept, which is what I like to do. From what I was able to gather, while the games don't really go very far when characterizing Erika, I often saw her occupation described as lady. But from what I was able to unearth, it seems like she's somewhat inspired by vintage Japanese perfume ads, and generally tends to fragrant flowers and plants to make perfumes herself. Erika's ace is technically Vileplume, however I decided to keep the design mostly inspired by Victreebel. I still kept the Vileplume and Gloom knots on the kimono fabric she carries on her arm though. For some reason it took me like 3 tries to get this one right. Even though I knew exactly what I was doing from the very beginning, getting the shapes and anatomy to look good was a real challenge. It wasn't until I decided to really log in and put my all into it that it started to work, and I'm glad I pushed through it. Some of my favorite details are the geta being held by bonsai roots, as well as the kanji inscribed on them. Big thanks to my friend PokeSuutamie for the help on figuring out the kanji I should include. I headcanoned this Erika to be just as peaceful and kind as the original, and putting her all into caring for her garden and the Pokemon she protects. I picture her sleeping under giant trees surrounded by flower Pokemon. Bryce as a character always perplexed me. I think he seems fairly interesting, but we never get to see much of him in game, I don't think. He also suffers from Johto haircut disease. Why is the hair always so boring? One thing I really enjoy from newer designs like, say, Opal from Galar, is the way old features are stylized and made into fun designs. While Bryce's design makes sense because of the time's limitation on like hardware, we can try to do something fun now. Referencing pictures of real people, I started working on a fun stylization of his features. Full disclosure, I was on call with some friends while working on this, and one of them mentioned the face features looking almost like a melting snowman. I decided to push this further and make them droopier. Something I've seen people talk about a lot lately is the idea of Pokemon character designs being Jijinkas of their aces. While I do think the resemblance can sometimes be a little distracting, I personally really enjoy seeing characters who play with more unique, interesting shapes that call them back to the type they specialize in. For Bryce, I wanted to include some of the features from his Piloswine, like the drooping eyebrows and mustache, while keeping the palette from the original Bryce mostly intact. One thing I really enjoyed about drawing older people is how much fun you can have with stylizing their features. I thought the long legs and short torso would be cute and like cartoony. Also, his walking cane now features real fossil ivory from Mamoswine. The original Bryce is very stoic and cold, so I thought keeping that would be very important for his character. However, I also wanted to give him a little more of like a goofy grandpa twist, you know, hitting people over their head with his cane or yelling at the lack of clouds. Certainly the most forgotten Hone type specialist, Juan is a character I find quite interesting. Within the games, we don't know a lot about him other than his status as well as his mentor. On what? Not quite sure. And his ability for Pokemon contest. I think the designs done for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are some of the best of the entire Pokemon franchise, and I honestly don't even know what to do with most of them. However, Juan was the child left behind, so I think we can work with less expectations here. From what I remember, Juan is supposed to be a womanizer, from the gym trainers only being women to his name itself possibly being a reference to a Don Juan. I think it's unmistakable. That being said, why is he wearing French clothing? Juan is a very Spanish name. Why is he wearing Mellow Rococo attire? Let's dig into this mystery. While the practice itself is something I and many other people oppose, you have to admit the costumes Spanish matadores or bullfighters wear are common. This combined with the body language and movements they're characterized by, I think it works perfect for a character who specializes in Pokemon contests, where the value of them comes from the aesthetic appeal of the moves performed. I wanted to put a lot of emphasis on the anatomy here. Something I'm trying to do lately with characters who are, I guess, more muscular is find the sweet spot between anatomical accuracy and stylization flow. And I think I found something that works with this design for Juan. I imagine this Juan takes the Casanova elements from the original and cranks them up to 11. He reminds me of peacocks and birds of paradise, you know, flaunting his Pokemon to gain that sweet cloud and admiration. Okay, now, I know at the beginning of this video I said that the characters I chose were not particularly bad designs. That statement I think does not apply to Fantina. Ever since I was a kid, the Fantina lashings have been at the forefront of my mind, and I'm gonna tell you exactly why. Fantina to me looks like a very specific type of design that a straight man would make when trying to make a character that is flashy and flamboyant. To me, this character comes across as so tacky and kitschy, but not in a cool way, just slouchy and crunchy. Like they tried so hard for Fantina to be cunt, but Fantina, you will never be cool. You will never be cool, no matter how hard you try. You stole Tucker's entire look and did it so poorly I'd be deeply offended if I was him. From the Amazon satin lavender gloves to the ugly frumpy draping on the dress that entirely omits the bust, the dress itself just hovering over the ground pisses me off so deeply and so profoundly. Not to mention the tumored wig she stapled and taped to her head. She just looks the fool to me, I'm sorry, it is what it is. But it's okay because today we're going to take care of it. And we're starting by throwing the entire character away and starting over. First things first, similar to Erica, while Fantina's ace is actually Miss Mage's, her design draws inspiration from Drifblim. Because Miss Mage's is already meant to look like stylized clothing, I figured keeping the Drifblim aesthetic would be more interesting. My first thought as a fashion history nerd was to make something inspired by one of my favorite eras in Western fashion, the 1830s. A big influence when I was going for this concept was Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein from 2025. The costume design in that movie, particularly for the characters played by Mia Goth, was impeccably done. And with the movie being set around the mid-1800s, I figured it was close enough to mishmash both references. This did not work. Around this time, I asked the masses if anyone ever thought a single positive thing about Fantina on twitter.com. And to my surprise, she had shooters? I will say most positive comments regarding Fantina focus on her theme and her character, with a very small minority having anything nice to say about her design. A couple of comments mentioned Fantina's noticeably masculine features, heavy quotation marks on that, and some of them even mentioned thinking she was meant to be a drag queen. We can work with this. Okay, I do want to bring the drawing process to a screeching halt here for a second. Because Fantina is always presented as a woman to us, and isn't as much of a stage persona, really, I thought it would be important to point out that although in the past, drag queens were mostly known as cisgender men who would perform exaggerated femininity, both the specific term and drag in general has grown to be much more inclusive and welcoming, unlimited to the artist's gender identity. Again, Fantina is presented to us under the assumption that she's always a woman. So I didn't want to erase that. I also decided against any particular label because as a trans person myself, I think she's more impactful if she's just Fantina. Anyways, while Fantina is originally depicted as an English-speaking person in the Japanese releases, most of the world knows her as a French speaker, so I decided to lean into this. One of my favorite French drag performers is the incredible Mami Wata, and she became a huge inspiration for this character. I also drew inspiration from other famous drag queens like Jada Essence Hall and Kiana, as well as general ballroom culture to further inform her character. Fantina as a character is very campy and flashy. However, I imagine the take on Fantina to be a little less outwardly flamboyant, instead exuding this air of regality and elegance, proper of a mother of the house. She definitely queens out here and there though. And here's all of them. Like I said at the beginning, this is just my personal interpretation of these characters and what I like to see in Pokemon designs. I'm aware my style can sometimes be a little more involved than what early Pokemon would really do, and certainly none of these work as sprites. But it's still a fun exercise to try out, and I definitely recommend it if you think it sounds fun. Another thing, when I started working on this, I was having a really hard time making the designs work. While I had what I think are fun ideas that stayed all the way through, I kept feeling like the sketches I was making looked off and kinda subpar. I'll admit it, sometimes I get a little too comfortable and start slacking, but after looking at my core references again, I felt the drive that was needed to truly lock in and make something I'm genuinely proud of, and I achieved that. I'm telling you this because as artists, it's so easy for us to just edit out the failures and only spotlight the successes, when in reality this type of project is much more trial and error than it may seem. Yeah, making mistakes and shitty work is frustrating, but ultimately I see it as another stepping stone that's getting me closer to my actual goal. You know, something happy accidents like Bob Ross. Okay, hey y'all! I had to take a break after the last video to work on commissions and other stuff, so sorry I've been MIA over here lately. Crazy that this video turned out to be the length of my previous two combined. I'm not gonna lie, it was a lot to edit, so I have no clue how the hell I'm gonna handle the long form videos I'm supposed to be working on, but I guess we'll see. Oh yeah, subscribe to the comments, like the bell, all that good stuff. Okay, bye y'all, bye!